Oh, grade school. Oh, my people. What's going on? It's Grade School Friday. It's the last Friday of 2022. I'm so excited to be with you guys. What's going on with y'all? How are you guys? You excited to do some color geeking today? I'm excited to do some color geeking today. I'm also excited for this last session of 2022, this last grade school. I really enjoyed the one we did last year, and I've got a hunch that we're going to have another really special grade school today. So I'm super excited you guys are here. Thank you for being here. Get your questions ready. We got lots to talk about. We're talking about teal and orange today. We've been going freestyle for the last few episodes of grade school. Today, we're talking about teal and orange, and we're going to go even further beyond what I was able to cover and what ended up already being a pretty long pre-recorded video this week on teal and orange, the most discussed, most loathed, most loved aesthetic in all of color grading. And I feel like I was just barely able to scratch the surface, and 20 minutes buzzed past when I was making that video. So we got tons to talk about. I'm really excited to hear y'all's questions and ideas about the teal and orange thing, because man, it's like it's right up there with LUTs as a concept in terms of how polarizing it is. I've never heard anyone say like, yes, teal and orange can be a useful technique in certain contexts. You ever heard anyone say that, except for maybe me? This is last week. Everyone else is out there like, you know, teal and orange is the devil. Teal and orange is the death of cinema. And other people are like, yeah, right. Good luck getting a high-end look without a teal and orange thing. So we're going to try to find the shades of gray in between there and actually figure out how to leverage this technique to make our grades look better. I'm really excited about it. My buddy Rafa's here with me. What's going on, Rafa?
Well, I've been hanging out this Christmas, and personally, I really like Teal and Orange. It's a fundamental base of how our eyes work.
Wait, you like what?
Teal and Orange.
Oh yeah, dude, teal and orange. It's a thing. It's a vibe.
It's great.
Yeah, that we could entitle today's episode "How I Learned to." Sorry, I'm messing with my iPad as we go along here. We could entitle today's episode "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Teal and Orange." It's gonna be a good chat. All right. Now, before we dive into teal and orange, get your questions ready. Drop them in the chat. Let us know what's on your mind. Let us know what follow-up questions you might have from this week's pre-recorded video. This episode, by the way, is brought to you by bubbly, sparkling water. I'm just kidding. I wish they would give me this water for free. I pay for it like everybody else. It is delicious, though. Raspberry. It's really good. Before we get into today's episode, I got some cool stuff to share with you guys. As you know, we like to kick off the new year with a bang. Here at Cullen Kelly Color, we've got some really fun stuff coming. In particular, we got a brand new LUT Pack coming out. I'm going to actually show you a little bit of that today because it really connects up to this conversation about teal and orange. So look out for more on that here shortly. We're going to be dropping that in the new year. It's going to be awesome. I am so proud of the looks and the concepts that we've been able to put together in this LUT Pack, and really excited to share it with you and excited to see how everyone uses it on your images. Similar concept to the Core Elements LUT Pack. It's just a bigger basket of options and incorporates my latest thinking and methodology and techniques of creative color science that I've been cultivating myself, and also picking up and in some cases openly stealing from my heroes of creative color science, many of whom you know, Dr. Mitch Bogdanowicz, my good friend Steve Yedlin, lots of folks in this space who are doing exciting stuff who I have the privilege of talking to and learning from on a regular basis and saying, that's kind of cool. I'm going to steal that, or I'm going to take that idea and put my twist on it. So lots of new and exciting color science ideas that are really going to get you better preferential reproduction cooked into this new LUT Pack, which I'm going to share lots more about with you in the coming weeks. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of later in today's episode. So that's number one. Number two, we got a podcast coming out. I am really excited for this podcast. I don't know if we're going to get to do it for every episode, but I'm trying for every episode to actually sit down on camera with the person that I'm talking to. So it's not just audio. We're actually sitting in the room having a conversation here in my studio. I've got some really good guests lined up. My friend Jill Bogdanowicz is going to join me. Lots of other really good guests lined up for this show. I cannot wait to launch that as well. That's coming out in the new year. So that's another really fun thing. And let's see what else. I've got so much that I can't even keep it all straight. We got so much coming out, and I'm really excited. The last thing that I will mention about the LUT Pack is when we release this, something that we kind of learned from the Core Elements LUT Pack. In general, I feel like everyone's put the Core Elements LUT Pack to amazing use. I've seen some really, really beautifully graded images that use that LUT Pack as the sort of baseline creative look. But I think one of the go-to questions or themes that we've heard a lot in the past year is, well, is there like a manual? Is there like a guidebook? How do I know how to use that? I heard you loud and clear, and it's not such an easy question to answer, but that doesn't mean it's not a good question to ask or that there is no answer. So for this LUT Pack, number one, we're actually in the LUT Pack. When you purchase it, you're going to get a set of tasting notes that sort of give you an idea of like, hey, here's what this is doing under the hood. Here are some contexts where you might find this LUT or this component particularly useful in your color grades. So a little bit of a guidebook there. More importantly, for those of you who purchased the LUT Pack in the first week that we put it on sale, we're actually going to do a kind of like mini grading course on how to work with these LUTs, how to grade underneath them, how to get really great looking images. So be sure to keep an eye out for all of this announcement about the LUT Pack. And if you haven't already grabbed one of my freebies, my Kodak 2383 LUT, my mid-gray DCTL, or rather the exposure chart DCTL, which we used in this week's video, go grab one of those things. That's the way you're going to get on my email list. That's the way you're going to find out about that LUT Pack. That's the way you're going to be able to grab that LUT Pack in that first week and get that totally free color grading course with me, where I'm going to show you hands-on, interactively, here's these LUTs, here's how I use them, and we'll also be able to answer any questions that you may have. So that's just a couple of the really exciting things that are coming in 2023 here on the channel and in auxiliary places around the channel. So can't wait for 2023. It's going to be a really awesome year. Now, let's talk about some Teal and Orange. Rafa, what's out there? What do we need to know? Where are we at with Teal and Orange?
We need to know that people cannot hear me. That's the first thing. So.
Oh, okay.
To repeat the question.
Yeah, let me actually hang tight one sec. Let me see if I can actually remedy this problem. Try telling me something good now, Rafa.
Maybe they can hear me now. Maybe.
Okay, I can still hear you, and I believe everyone else should still be able to hear you. So let's cross our fingers. Let us know in the chat if that's the case.
All right, I'm just going to continue then. So let's go to the first question from Christian. At a very basic level, how does something like a film lookup table achieve the Teal and Orange split that cannot be achieved with the native tools in Resolve?
Ooh, this is a fun question, and it really kind of goes to some of what we're going to look at when we look at these LUTs that I keep mentioning. But at a fundamental level, what is a film LUT doing with Teal and Orange that a basic split toning scheme in Resolve is not? It's a great question to ask. So at the simplest level, if I like zoom way out, I could tell you with a straight face, frankly, like fundamentally nothing. Like the most prominent sort of like reshaping of the image along that Teal and Orange axis, it's happening in the same way. If you look at the net of a film system, you're going to see in the 1D curves of that system, which is what we're manipulating when we play with our custom curves here inside of Resolve. I don't know why I'm going here. I'm not really going to demo anything, but just to put some kind of visual to what we're talking about. When we look at these custom curves, these are just a way of implementing what are called 1D curves inside of Resolve. And the reason we call them 1D is because we're manipulating things along the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. So it's actually a more fitting term would be 3 by 1D curves, because it is 3 individual 1D curves. But the difference between this and some of the more complex things that we might do in creative color science is that we cannot change, for example, I have no mechanism in here to say, hey, in my red channel, I want you to make a particular behavior. I can say, based on the input red, change the output red. That's what I'm doing here, right? I can say, based on the input green, change the output green. That's all I'm doing here, right? That makes sense. That should be hopefully just a review for us. What I cannot do with my 1D curves is say, hey, based on, for example, my input blue, change my output red. I can't do that. There's no interaction between the red and the green and the blue channels, or in the case of film, the red and the green and the blue layers when we're just talking about the 1D curves of things. They're just independent channels that have no knowledge of one another. With me so far? So what we did in this week's video, that second technique, that split toning technique that I showed you, that is a manipulation of our 1D curves. We actually don't need interaction between the channels in order to pull that off. Now, in a film system, what's happening? The baseline, as I said, is that same 1D curves principle. There's a biasing in the individual channels. If you look at the net of the system, there's a biasing in the individual channels of cooler stuff in the bottom and warmer stuff in the top, okay? The difference with film, what adds that extra kiss, and I'm actually going to visually demo this for you here very shortly, what adds that extra kiss is the more complex 3D things that are happening as well, where we're saying, based on not only, for example, the red, but based on the red and the green and the blue all falling within a particular range, do this particular thing to the output red and green and blue. These are 3D manipulations, right? So we're saying, hey, here's a position in 3D space that is represented by a certain amount of red, green, and blue, and then move it to a different position in the output 3D space, another, like set of coordinates of red, green, and blue. Does that make sense? That's a long-winded answer, but the fundamental thing, when we do 1D curves like we talked about in this week's video, we are doing the ground level of what you see in a film system that we find so desirable. And if we think about Teal and Orange, let's look at history for a minute. If we look at the history of this technique, really, to my mind, one of the first sort of artists or companies or forces to popularize the teal and orange thing, so-called, in its modern incarnation, it was really the artists at Company 3, who started Company 3, who were among the first to say, hey, I know we're working with color correction tools, and I know we're working in that case, some sort of hybrid of electronic and analog media, but what if we treated this tool as a creative tool, not as a corrective tool? Up until that point, color correctors and telecine machines and Da Vinci's, as they were known back then, they were really conceived of as more of well, how are we going to correct the greens that are too green or whatever? Where the artists at Company 3 were really some of the first to say, hey, what if we use these tools creatively and expressively? And they were among the first to figure out, how can I use these tools to create that sort of split tone feeling that I get from a film? And because of the limitations of their tools at the time, early days, all they really had was biasing those neutrals, doing those 1D curves. And then as things evolved and we were able to incorporate things like 3D LUTs, we could better model the behavior of a film system. So that's a very long answer to a very good question that says, but in net, no huge difference. We're doing the same fundamental thing with 1D curves. If we want to go further and get the more complex nuances of what makes a film system so beautiful, then we have to go beyond those into more complex things, some of which we can do and resolve, some of which we can't.
All right, Jim Robinson is here, and he wants to know, at what point do you neutralize the shadows? I assume if you're using a lookup table that has split toning. And also Christian is asking that some of the LUTs do not allow 100% neutral blacks, and he has to do post-LUT adjustments. So where in the chain we neutralize shadows?
Ooh, these are good questions, and I feel like I'm scared of my answer because I feel like Jim's gonna bust me. Jim's gonna be the color grading lifeguard, the color grading traffic cop, and I'm gonna get a speeding ticket here. When do I neutralize my shadows? I don't like neutral shadows. I don't care for neutral shadows at all. I don't think they're important. I don't think they're pretty. So I don't neutralize them at all. I virtually always am working under some kind of split toning scheme. And if I'm not, then that's of course because that's the direction that I or my client feels appropriate for that material. And even then, I'm not explicitly trying to balance my shadows. I'm just looking for where I want my shadows to sit in such a way that I find them pleasing. But shadow balancing, shadow neutralization, that is not an explicit part of my typical color grading process. I might look at shadows and say, I think those shadows are, for example, too magenta, but I'm not looking at them and saying, oh, those shadows are balanced and they need to be corrected. I'm just looking at them and saying, I want something different than what I'm seeing. That's a subtle distinction, but an important one for me. And I feel like I'm going to end up in color grading jail when Jim hears that. But that's the honest truth of how I think about that stuff.
All right. Another question from Wiry, something like that. I've seen many Hollywood movies using teal color just to the neutral part of the image. Any idea on how to make it?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do have an idea on how to make that. Sorry, my computer continues to give me trouble here today, guys, or I should say my iPad. But let's talk about that. Actually, it's time. We got to take a look at these LUTs because we just keep touching on things that are right in the wheelhouse of these new LUTs that I've created. So let's get my situation resolved here once more. And we're going to take a look at these LUTs. I'm so excited to show these to you guys. I really think you're going to dig these. Hang tight one moment. Drum roll for suspense. Okay, there we go. All right, so LUTs incoming. So this new LUT pack is called the Voyager LUT Pack. And the idea is to build on the modular design that we incorporated in the Core Elements LUT Pack, but to take it even further. Okay, so there are two versions of this LUT pack. There's the Essentials pack and there's the Pro pack. The Essentials pack is 17 of the best damn looking LUTs I've ever seen that you can choose from. The Pro pack is especially cool. The Pro pack has tone and palette components similar to the way we designed the Core Elements LUT pack, for those of you who've played with that or are familiar with it. So we've got a tone, which does contrast component, and then we've got a palette, which does a color palette component. But within here, we've gone even more modular. So we have, these are actually old names, but we're calling these foundation and modifier, okay? So within each of these, you can apply a foundation. Let's just go ahead and start building this. So we can apply a foundation like so. That's just straight up contrast, just a nice contrast curve. Different foundations will give you a different character of contrast curve. And then we've got an accent. And this is really what I wanted to show you guys that is most connected to our teal and orange conversation. This is where you're going to get your split toning. And these are just preset cocktails of split toning that do different tasty things to your image. And if we look at this through the lens of like a grayscale ramp, it'll be even easier to see kind of what's going on. So let's go to our waveform here. And let me go ahead and turn off my output color space for just a moment. So let's just say same as timeline for now, so that I'm only seeing the look that I'm building. And so I've got my ramp here, and I'm going to turn off my contrast curve so you can see this is just split toning along the lines of what we looked at in this week's video. And it's just different cocktails of split toning that do different things. And as we talked about, there are tasting notes to accompany these, and that will kind of like guide you through like, hey, what is the actual net hue that the shadows are pushing toward, or that the highlights are pushing toward? What's the balance in between those? Are we pushing there by pulling other colors or by actively increasing the colors that we're trying to get? A million different ways, you know, like put it this way, the split toning thing that I showed you guys this week, you may have seen me demo that before. Maybe you hadn't seen me demo that before. But what I showed you, those ground principles that we looked at in this week's teal and orange video, that's like, anybody play music? You guys hear me talk about playing music all the time, as if I have any clue how to play music. I don't, but I love music, and I love to play, however poorly. When you get introduced to the blues for the first time, the blues is disarmingly simple. You got, you know, like 5 notes. That's it. Here's the blues, man. You got 5 notes and 3 chords. That's it. That's the entire like legacy of the blues genre. 5 notes and 3 chords. But the more you play and the more you listen, instead of that world narrowing and feeling confining, the more things actually expand. You're like, oh wait, but I could do this, or that's really interesting, or I could play in a different time signature, or I could introduce this note that doesn't actually belong in there, but boy, does it sound good in this context. So the reason I make this analogy is it's the same thing with split toning. It seems so simple. You push a certain hue into the bottom, and then you pivot at a predetermined point, and then you push a different, often opposite of the color wheel, opposite side of the color wheel hue into the top, right? Dirt simple. But I got to tell you, after years of messing around with this, the possibilities just keep revealing themselves to me. So that's really the idea here is, you know, like to have a set of some of the most alluring possibilities and sort of cocktails that I've come up with that you can introduce in whatever form you want to into your image. Okay. So that's the teal and orange, like split toning schemes that you can actually take advantage of here inside of the Voyager LUTs. But now let's go back to our question about how would you get cool colors only into the neutrals. That's such a great observation. I feel like the first time I spotted that, I was like, wait, that's what's happening there. That's pretty cool. And then I immediately asked the question that we're asking now. How the heck do I do that? Well, here's one way that you can do that. You can use from the palette set of LUTs, which have the same principle. You've got a base where you can define a sort of like baseline level of, like color distribution or color weight and hue biasing, if you will. So here's one that like just does really beautiful filmy things to the image. I just love that. And then if we look at these accents, let's take a look and see. There's one in particular that we got some great black and white accents in here that you're really going to like. Yeah, so Kari here is going to do exactly what you're talking about. It's going to bias only your neutrals. I have a shot that I was testing this on that I don't have here in this timeline, but it's going to bias only your neutrals toward a cooler color. So in this frame, that's really just like the white of the board here that's just being biased slightly cooler. So how can you do that? It's not that easy to do, especially in Resolve. The tools inside of Resolve don't offer a great way of achieving this. However, I've got a great method of achieving this that I have custom coded and that I have cooked into this particular modifier LUT within the palette subfolder of the Voyager Pro Pack of LUTs. So there's that's one way to do it. Essentially what you have to do is find a really mellow and clean way to say, hey, pump this color into this region, but only if the baseline saturation is quite low. Make sense? That sounds like something you could do with a qualifier. It turns out you really can't do it very well with a qualifier, at least not in a way that repeats itself consistently and cleanly across lots of different shots. So one potential way to do that, Kari from the modifiers within the palette subfolder of the Voyager Pro Pack has got you covered.
All right, let's stick with the Teal and Orange for a second. This moment, let's go to a fancier way. Can we discuss the LAB color space to create the Teal and Orange look?
Ooh, we should discuss the LAB space to create a teal and orange look. I'm going to be honest with you. I haven't used LAB for like a year, so I'm going to end up groping through it and figuring things out along with you guys in a way that I'm not sure is going to be the most action-packed, exciting way to spend our time today. I'm glad you asked that question. Please ask it again because I'm going to go back and revisit my LAB chops. But off the top of my head, just being completely honest, I don't think I can make a tidy and valuable roundup of how to accomplish that inside of LAB, though it's certainly possible. It's certainly a good thing to explore. I just haven't done it in a while, so I don't want to waste our time by fumbling through it.
All right, let's go to another kind of question. In your recent video about Teal and Orange, the shadow tones were quite blue after modifying the curves. How do I get the image into a tealish zone instead of a pure blue? So basically, what's the relationship between the curves and the hues?
Ooh, great question. Yeah, so this is actually a very complex topic, but we can make it fairly simple with some rules of thumb, okay? So let's just wipe these things out for now. Let's go to a fresh image. And I'm going to turn off my Pro Pack modifier here, my tone modifier that is. So I've just got kind of like a preferential contrast curve. I'm going to go to my favorite one here, which happens to be Orion. And let's talk about that split toning thing. So hue and the way we perceive, hue is a perceptual phenomenon ultimately. So the way we perceive hue is a complicated thing to discuss. But loosely speaking, in terms of like aligning to hues on our vector scope, here's like the rule of thumb. If we look at our 1D curves and at drawing a 1D curve, let me get this up where you guys can see it. And let's look at just our vector scope. And let's make this really, really simple and look at a grayscale ramp as our base, okay? So for starters, we essentially just have a single dot there in the middle of my vector scope, right? And if we look at what our curves are doing in net, let's just say, I'm going to be lazy here and say that I dropped that perfect middle gray that I showed you guys how to drop, even though I'm not going to go to the trouble of doing it right now. Like so. And let's just look at when we are pushing cool colors into the shadows. So we already know, as you observe in your question, if I just take blue and I make that rainbow, look at my vector. I'm basically marching straight toward blue, right? The only reason that that's shifting a little bit is because as I go high enough, the blue curve is actually dropping up in the upper end of the tone scale. So that's changing the hue vector a little bit. But assuming I keep that truly locked like so with maybe a second control point, we're marching basically straight toward blue, right? Now, how can we get this? What if we wanted this to be cyan? I don't have a cyan channel here, right? Anybody know? Green. Cyan is blue plus green in a colorimetric context. Perceptually, it's not quite that tidy, but if you're wanting to get a more cyan, if you want to rotate the hue of your shadows toward green or cyan, add green, like so. If you want to have a green shadow in the first place, leave your blue where it's at, and then if you want to pull those greens towards cyan, do the opposite. Just add some blue in there. You follow me? Does that make sense? Same thing in the highlights. If we want to create a red push in the highlights, well, we know how to do that, don't we? We go to our red curve and we make our rainbow, and look at that vector marching straight up toward red. If we want to create a gold or a yellow or an orange, we go back to our good old friend green, start adding that in, and look at what happens. Oh wait, let me confine that to that same zone. Look at that. We are rotating that vector in any direction. And that's actually one of the things that makes like the split tone LUTs that I was just showing you guys, the tone modifier LUTs that I was just showing you, you know, it on one hand, you look at all of them, you're like, okay, great. I see red, green, and blue diverging and then coming back together at specific points on the curve. They're all together at 0, they come together at mid-gray, and they come together at 1, and in between, they're just twisting and spinning away from each other in slightly different ways. What's the big deal? How many of these could I possibly need? Well, the truth is it's a lot more significant than it looks, because when you're applying this to an image, the difference between like this and that's huge perceptually, right? Let me turn this gallery off and give us a fair shot of actually seeing what I'm talking about. If we turn this here, you know, even make like a relatively small nudge, especially as we start to hit that, you know, kind of yellow moving into green territory, that makes a big difference on the image. Here we go. That's what I wanted. That makes a big difference, right? Because you're effectively now biasing anything above middle gray, you're dragging it in a particular direction. Now, whether you drag it straight toward red, straight toward yellow, or at some predefined point in between is actually going to have a profound impact on your image. And even more so because you're, if you take my advice, you're going to be using your split toning scheme consistently across all the shots in your project. So this actually kind of goes back to, you know, like the subject that Jim and Christian brought up about balancing shadows, for example. This is why I'm so picky and so like detail oriented about my split tone scheme, whether that's explicitly teal and orange or something else, is because I know that when that's good, it's going to be dragging, for example, my skin tone in a direction that I like, shot after shot after shot after shot. However, if my split tone scheme has just a little too much green in the shoulder, that means that I'm going to land on shot after shot after shot and see what I'm seeing right here, which is like, that's not bad, but it's feeling a little greeny yellow to my eye. And I'm going to end up having to compensate for that here at my grading level, which I prefer to do minimal compensation when I'm grading. I just want to enhance and elevate. I really don't want to be compensating for something imperfect in my color management or pipeline or in my creative overall look. Does that make sense? Again, kind of a long answer, but I feel like that was worth exploring, and it's a great question to keep in mind. What hue are you marching what section of your tone curve toward, and do you like that? Does that work for your project?
All right, let's go to a different topic for a moment. How does a tone curve in linear preserve the signal when the RGB values appear to be crashing everywhere?
How does a tone curve in linear... Well... I feel like we've been on kind of a kick of long answers here on Grade School and slightly detailed ones, but devil's in the details. God is in the details. So let's chop it up. I'm gonna try to make a brief summary of that question. It's a good question to ask. So the question, if I'm understanding it fundamentally, is like, why, if I'm looking at an image in linear, you know, if I just go from whatever I'm in, DaVinci Wide Gamut here, and I go to DaVinci Linear, like so, and let's just really simplify things for a minute, and let's turn off our output transform like we did a minute ago. So I'm looking at no output transform, and all I'm doing is I'm in log right now, DaVinci Intermediate specifically, and all I'm doing is moving into linear. And the question is, how is it that this is preserving detail? It looks like it's crushing the hell out of our details, right? Well, there's a couple of things to understand there. First of all, it's preserving detail simply because the numbers are still occupying an appropriate range. So even though the shadows are very, very dense, they are still all above zero, and they are still all distinct from each other. So even though I cannot visually discern the difference, like if I'm looking at log here, it's quite easy for me to discern the difference between the dark portion of this underside of this bar here to the right of this partition versus the darker thing here, right? You see what I'm saying there? When I turn on this tone curve, good luck. It all just looks like a big black mass, right? So the fact remains that in this linear encoding, that distinction, this code value is still different from that code value. We just can't see it. Now the question becomes, well, why not? And now we're going to end up sort of like stumbling our way into color management 101, the ground level of color management. If we took a really naive, really broad, really simplistic view of color management, do you know what I need to do in order to make this image make sense for my display? Set aside color gamut completely for a second. We know that we're in DaVinci Wide Gamut. We know there's all kinds of colors in there that my Rec 709 monitor isn't going to be able to reproduce. Ignore that for a moment, okay? Do you know what we need to do? The simplest thing that we need to do, if I could only do one thing, say like, hey, Cullen, this is your image, and you can do one thing and one thing only to this image in order to make it look more reasonable on your display. Do you know what that one thing would be? We're going to create another color space transform, and we are going to say, we're going to stay DaVinci Wide Gamut for our color space. We know that we're going to be starting from linear, like so, and all we're going to do from here is apply a gamma curve. Okay? So that doesn't look great, but that's the simplest form of what it is to tee up a linear image for our display. Why do we have to do this? Because our display, if we look at the ramp of what's happening here, and we ignore this for a moment, say, okay, so we just did this to the image, going from linear, right? Why did we do that? Why was that the thing that made us able to actually perceive those tonal variations again? Because, bear with me, we're going kind of deep here, but this is great stuff to discuss, because this is what my display is going to do to the incoming signal. Does that make sense? So we are counteracting what the display is going to do here. If you look at, this is the behavior of the display. This is what's called the electro-optical transfer function. If we look at what the display is going to do and we combine it with what we just did, the net is actually linear. Makes sense? When I turn these off and on as a pair, nothing changes. So that's why, even in a linear encoding, the simple answer to your question, why in a linear encoding, how is it possible that it's preserving all those shadow details that look like they're being crushed? The short answer is because it is. Because even though we can't perceive them, those distinctions between different levels of shadow are still there. And the reason why we can't see them is because we have not properly transformed the linear image for our gamma display. Once we do, those details and distinctions return. Now, there's other stuff. If you really want to map a image properly for the display, like we said, our color gamut is way out. We're sending this thing a DaVinci wide gamut color gamut, and my display can't show that, so that's going to be wrong. But if I add rack 7 or 9, now I'm going to start to get some sensible color. Now we get another problem because we've got big dynamic range and we're going to a limited dynamic range, and we really should be doing some tone mapping, which is another kind of level of complexity beyond that. But at the fundamental level, the simplest thing, the baseline of color managing for a display is to apply a gamma function that counteracts the gamma function of the display itself. Okay, so another great question. Hopefully a reasonably brief and reasonably digestible sort of exploration of how color spaces such as linear, gamma, and log work and interact, and what exactly how those things fit together.
All right, let's go to a less dense question from Marina. What will be the difference if we pull red down in the shadows instead of pulling up blue and green?
Ooh, yes. Love asking this question. And the truth is, you're going to get, like your net hue. Let's look at our curves again here. I don't think I might need scopes again in a minute. Let's kill this ramp. Let's get a little bit of preferential contrast in here. Let's look at a fresh image. Let's go Isabella's good for this example. So what's the difference? Let's say we are doing, I'm gonna go by the book here. I'm actually gonna get out my exposure chart and drop a middle gray, okay? So we got our mid-gray, we're in DaVinci Intermediate, one total step. By the way, for anyone who had trouble getting access to this DCTL in the link from this week's video, that has been updated. So if you had trouble and you were getting a dead link, we've recently changed over all of the links for the exposure chart and the 2383 LUT and all the cool stuff that we offer here on the channel. Those links should be updated and good to go now if you want to go back there and grab this exposure chart. It's super handy for what we're doing here. So I've got my pure patch of mid-gray. I'm going to go to my curves, and I'm going to tap up here to get my anchor point riding right along this tooth. And then I'm going to wipe out, or actually I need to do that in a fresh node, like so. And then I'm going to wipe out my exposure chart because its purpose is done. Now, Marina's question is, what would be the difference between adding, say, blue and green versus pulling red from our image? Well, let's first of all align our sort of ideas here. In theory, in principle, if I add equal parts red and green, or excuse me, if I add equal parts blue and green to my image, what did we just observe that's going to produce for us? Cyan, right? So that's number one. Blue plus green in equal parts equals cyan in a colorimetric sense. Again, perception is a little hazier, but in terms of like the actual color and like the vectors that we'll see on our vector scope. Okay. If I add blue and green, I will get cyan. If I subtract red, what will I get? Cyan. Because if I subtract red, what am I leaving? Equal amounts of blue and green. So Marina's question is, great, so what's the difference? So let's take a look. Let's audition it. Let's say we've got a contrast curve going on here. And by the way, with whether you are using my the Voyager LUTs in their component pieces, or you are designing things yourself here in Resolve, where you place your split toning in relationship to other components of your look will change the way that it feels. So just for fun, let's actually place our split toning before our creative contrast curve. So here's our creative contrast curve. Here's our split toning that we're working on right now. And let's just audition the question. So version number 1, and I'm going to kind of go strong with this just for the sake of making it visually obvious what we're doing. Although not so strong that I'm bending things in the top end. I don't love that. That's another good trick. Can you guys see what I'm doing here? Like, it's slippery, but as I increase the strength of that blue rainbow, I'm actually getting a counterpoint of dropping the blue here in the upper end, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to pan another control point by hitting Option, and that's going to ensure that that's not allowed to bleed over and influence the upper end as well. Okay, so we've got our blue. Now we're going to do the exact same thing in our green. We've already got that anchor in place, and we're just going to eyeball that directly into place. And that's quite strong, but that's fine. I'm also going to do that little anchor in my green channel, like I did on the blue, to just kind of keep it from shifting things up in the upper end. So you can see, like, everything in this image is being pushed toward that cyan vector when I go before and after, and that's super strong. Now, let's grab a still. Let's look at the opposite. What if we simply, let me just wipe these control points out so I can keep my mid-gray. If I hit control, I can wipe those points out. And now let's go to my red curve, and let's just drop the red. So you can see the same kind of thing is happening here. And if we look at the two, we're just going to get subtle differences in the densities of these colors, you know? So I'll put it to you this way. This is another one of those, like, you know, we talked about the blues analogy, and we talked about, like, oh, well, 5 notes maybe 5 notes and 3 chords maybe 3 chords. But what if I add this note into that second chord? Or what if I play this whole groove in a different time signature? These are the variations that start to come to mind when you're fooling around with any form of music, frankly. Same kind of thing with our split toning, to say, like, well, what does it mean if I add blue and green or pull red? What does that do? What does it mean in the shadows? What does it mean in the highlights? I'll give you one scheme that I really like lately. I really like doing positive color in the shadows, so that shadows, if anything, are being kind of net moved up a little bit from where they were prior to the split toning. And then I like to do negative split toning in the highlights, so that I'm getting more of a subtractive feeling, and the highlights are rolling over more as opposed to being pushed hotter and more garish in the high end. So there's no right or wrong, and essentially it's going to control the densities of those areas. Are you going to be adding value, luminance, or, you know, decreasing density, or are you going to be increasing density, dropping the value as you introduce that color? And then a third option that I also play with all the time is, like, well, maybe I want to try to do my split toning in a luminance preserving manner, so that I'm really not moving luminance up or down, but I'm preserving it as best I'm able to with that new redistribution of my red, green, and my blue channels. These are all the kind of fun flourishes and nuances that I play with in all of my creative color science practice, and that I try to incorporate in different expressions into these tone modifier LUTs in the new Voyager LUT Pack. Million different ways to skin the cat, and they all matter. They're all going to subtly change the type of reproduction you get on your images, and they're all really fun to play with. So I hope that gives you some sort of framework from which to go forth and experiment and come up with your own conclusions.
Question here. Do you ever do your split toning with just lift and gain?
Ooh, that's a great question. That actually connects up really nicely to something we were talking about earlier today, where we were talking about the way that the orange and teal aesthetic in its modern incarnation was kind of first introduced into image mastering by the artists who started Company 3, okay? And do you want to know how they were generally doing that? Lift and gain, because that's what they had available to them. They didn't have custom curves in their early incarnations of the DaVinci or whatever systems they were using, or if they did, they were typically not using them because they were probably not being taught by people who are coming from a background of subtly manipulating custom curves, which is really more of either a photochemical, if you think about mentors like, or people like my mentor, Dr. Mitch Bogdanowicz, who innately understand curves because the language of a photochemical system is largely spoken in curves, or you think about photographers who've had custom curves in Photoshop for as long as there's been digital photograph manipulation. Color correction for motion imaging has really been more about lift and gain primarily, and the curves is a different tradition that we kind of had to slowly adopt. So those artists, they were doing it with lift and gain for sure. And I know artists to this day, artists who, generally artists who've been around since those days, who that's the way they achieve what we're talking about, that orange and teal thing. They will achieve it with lift and gain. However, here's kind of what I like to keep in mind. Ultimately, your image is your image. If your image looks good, you know, there's that saying in golf, there's no picture on the scorecard. I talked about this, I feel like, in maybe the last couple of weeks here in grade school. If I make the worst golf shot of all time and completely ding a ball, hard right way out to the right when I wanted it to go straight, but then it bounces off of a tree and it kicks off of a rock and it drops right into the hole, I got a hole in one. You know what I mean? Like that's a hole in one. There's no like there's no discounting that I got my hole in one. Is that the most repeatable or the most sound process? Maybe not, but I still got my hole in one. So one idea, no flight record, no picture on the scorecard. That's all good and well. However, I do think you can learn something about whether a lift and gain approach is really best by looking at what that type of approach is doing on a grayscale ramp. The grayscale ramp is your friend. It's not what it looks like on a grayscale ramp is not more important than what it looks like on an image, but I'll put it to you this way. What an operation looks like on a grayscale ramp can be a very good predictor of how clean your operation is, how repeatable your operation is, and how likely it is to produce clean and consistent results on lots of different shots when you don't have the opportunity. For me, for example, when I'm like developing these Voyager LUTs, I can't look at every image that you guys are going to use them on. I don't have that luxury, right? So I have to have predictors for how well will this travel. One of the ways that I predict how well something will travel is to evaluate it on a grayscale ramp. We love grayscale ramps here in grade school, as we all know. But if we look at a lift and gain approach to orange and teal here on the grayscale ramp, let's just party with this for a minute. So I'm going to go over here to my primaries and create a new node downstream. So here we are, cooling things off in the shadows. And here we are, warming things up in the highlights. So what are the two things that stand out to you here? Here are the two things that stand out to me. First of all, this is hopelessly linear, right? So I am theoretically, if I have an incoming image with a pixel value of 1, that pixel value will be driven above 1, well outside, like right over the fence, in a way that when we were doing things in our curves method, it would not, right? Same thing in the shadows. I'm going to be either like lifting up the very bottom shadows or actually driving them below 0. Again, something that we are not suffering from when we do things with curves. More importantly, here's the thing that I find troubling. Remember how we talked in this week's pre-recorded video about that pivot point, and we looked at it just now of like using the exposure chart to set a sensible pivot so that we have high confidence that a well-exposed image, an image that we've graded to a proper exposure level, passing through this LUT, it'll have that kind of turnover, that pivot point from cool push to warm push at the optimal position in the curve graph. When we do things with lift and gain, like so, we have no concept of where that turnover is. We can kind of like visually assess it just by looking at the image, but you can see just depending on my subtle nudges here, there still is a turnover point where things are crossing from going warm to going cool, but I have no concept of whether that's quite close or quite far from the average middle gray of my tone curve, which to me is not sacred except in the sense that if you give me 1,000 shots, do you want to know after I'm done grading where the average level for a mid-gray patch, where that is going to plot on the curve? It's going to plot reasonably close to the mid-gray of that curve. So on the average, on the whole, if I'm designing a LUT for you guys that I want to travel as well as possible, I want it to be anchored around that mid-gray because I know that a graded image feeding into that on average is going to have its middle exposed values resting reasonably close to the middle gray of that curve. So it's a sort of sensible constraint to explicitly impose on the image that you can't explicitly impose on the image when you are using a lift and gain methodology. So that's my sort of geeky and rigorous answer. At the same time, if you can get good results with lift and gain and you're not perceiving those clipping problems that I just referred to, and you're not perceiving a problematic biasing of the things that you would hope to keep neutral, or you're not perceiving a problematic turnover point from cool shadows to warm highlights, lift and gain, you know, I expressed my fear about going to color grading jail. I'm not going to end up in color grading jail. Spoiler alert. I'm gonna remain a free man, and you will too, even if you choose to split tone with lift and gain.
All right, let's go here to a very fun question. If I really want to push the image because the original camera negative doesn't have teal and orange components, like on the tutorials where people use qualifiers for the skin in a layer mixer and then pushing or subtracting red in the outside node, what would be your method to achieve that kind of result in a clean way? Could you demonstrate it?
Ooh, by the way, thank you to the person asking that question for telling me what's taught in all those other orange and teal videos. I knew it wasn't good because I see people periodically trying out their teal and orange technique, but that's actually more of a specific summary of what goes on in those orange and teal videos than I was aware of. So thank you. How would I achieve that? Gosh, I don't want to be a wet blanket, but I wouldn't do that. I really wouldn't. The closest I would come is something like, like this modifier LUT that I showed you guys a couple minutes ago, this accent modifier LUT, where you are cooling shadows, but only shadows that are neutral. You could look at doing something like that if you wanted to achieve a sort of sneakier orange and teal, even when there's not that much orange and teal sort of palette in the image in the first place. But here's the thing, guys. I mean, this is like, I've shared with you like my favorite quote from or one of my favorite quotes from the movie Michael Clayton, which, by the way, that's a movie that looks awesome. Go check out Michael Clayton if you hadn't. But there's that great line in Michael Clayton toward the beginning of the movie where he's like, "Look, the math here is simple. I'm a janitor. The smaller the mess, the easier it is for me to clean up. So if you bring me an image, if you're my client, you bring me an image and it doesn't have any sort of color harmony across the cool to warm axis, and you tell me you want me to bake such a color harmony in, I'm going to very gently push back and say, hey, I want to find what's special and innate about your image. I don't want to graft something that might work for another image onto your image. That's not fun. It's not going to get good results, and it's certainly not going to get the best possible results for your image. I'm going to try to do that diplomatically. I'm going to try to be gentle about it when I talk with the client about that. But the firmer they push, the more firmly I will push back. And ultimately, if we're in the hypothetical scenario we're talking about, there is no orange and teal, there is no cool to warm color harmony in this image. Client wants orange and teal at like a 10. My answer will be, I'm not your colorist. Again, in the kindest possible way, and stated in such a way because I know that if that's what they want, there probably is someone who can get them a better version of that than I'm going to be able to. It just bristles me too much. I just don't know how to navigate that space because it feels so imposed. So, yeah, sorry if that's a downer of an answer, but that's my honest answer. If I've got to resort to those kind of like acrobatics to try to make the thing work, that to me is the biggest possible clue that I need to do, that I'm doing the wrong thing to the wrong image. If that makes sense.
All right. Very dense question here. Could you give a brief overview of how the math of the color space transform works for color space and gamma?
Yes, I can give a brief one. This is actually kind of a nice connection up to our conversation about display encoding and linear and gamma and log and all that stuff. So I'm just going to give you guys the building blocks of color space transformation. There are lots of color space transformation, moving in between color spaces, which is all the color space transform exists to do. There are lots, it can become complex. I'm going to put it to you that way. And there are lots of complex things and multiple complex things that can be happening in the context of a color space transform. But the simplest sort of like, trying to think of the best way to put this. The standard practice for moving in between color spaces in an RGB system, which we're all working in. Our cameras capture RGB, our displays show RGB. For the moment, that's the domain, that's the reality that we live in, is 3 things in, red, green, and blue, and 3 things out, red, green, and blue. In such a realm, which is the exclusive realm that we occupy when we are dealing with motion images, the standard way that we move in between any 2 color spaces, the foundation of moving in between those, can be summarized in 3 steps. Anyone know what those 3 steps are? I'm going to give you just a second to think about it, and I'll probably start gabbing before anyone has a chance to chime in there in the chat. But if any of my color science aficionados are here with me, drop it into the chat. Let me know if you have a good guess about that. There's 3 steps that are at the foundation of any color space transformation. And just to make things a little bit more specific, the color space transformation that I am about to look at, we're going to look at going from, let's say we're going to look at going from, I don't know, let's say S log 3, S gamut 3 cine to Airy log C3. Okay, Airy wide color gamut, Airy log C3. That's the specifics of what we're going to be doing. Okay, we're going to do it in a color space transform, and then we're going to talk about what the color space transform is doing. Anybody get those 3 steps? Those 3 steps are as follows. Decode the incoming curve. So where are we starting? We are in Sony S log 3. So Sony S log 3 is a log curve, right? We need to decode that log encoding so that we get what? A linear encoding. We need to get back to linear. That's step number 1. Get into a linear domain. What happens next? We're going to use a 3x3 matrix. We've talked a little bit about 3x3 matrices this year, but the easiest way to understand a 3x3 matrix is as a high precision version of Resolve's RGB mixer, okay? It's just a way of saying, hey, put this much red, this much green, and this much blue into the output red. Put this much input green, this much input red, this much input blue into the output green, and so on for the blue channel. It's just a way of remixing our color channels, as the RGB mixer gives title to. So that's our second step. We are going to use a matrix whose job it is to move us from the primary set of Sony S gamut 3 cine into the primary set of area wide gamut 3. It's a matrix, okay? We're almost home free. Now, what this system is going to do, the last thing that needs to happen, again, feel free to take a guess. If we look at what we've done so far, essentially what in the sequence that we're summarizing here, what we've done up to this point is this. We've gotten to linear and we've gotten into wide gamut 3. Now we just need to get into area log C3. So that process in summary, decode the incoming log or gamma curve back to linear, apply a 3x3 matrix in linear space from source gamut to target gamut, and then encode to the target gamma or log curve, in this case, area log C3. Lots of things and bells and whistles that come on top of that, namely tone mapping and gamut mapping, but that's the foundation. Those 3 steps are the foundation of moving in between any 2 color spaces. You cannot move in between any 2 color spaces without those 3 steps, okay? So I hope that's a decent summary of a question that certainly can become more involved. Now, we've managed to burn through almost an hour, guys. I hope we got to go a little bit deeper on Teal and Orange than we were able to get in this week's pre-recorded video. I definitely think we were. We covered a lot of great questions. You guys had a lot of great ideas and questions that you brought to the conversation. And now we're going to play out a second iteration of a tradition that I started last year. We're not going to be talking about color grading for a second here. So let me turn my color grading mode off. And as I do this, I'll just give you my same disclaimer. If you're here for the color grading and you don't care a bit about Cullen's personal ideas or life philosophy, you're free to call it a day for grade school today, and we'll see you for the next one. If you want to stick around, I just want to talk to you about a little bit about what New Year's Eve means to me, and about like looking at the past year and looking at the coming year and sort of what that all means to me. If you guys were here for grade school last year, you heard me talk in more detail than I'm going to talk today about my personal journey with sobriety from drugs and alcohol. It's been a slow and sort of nonlinear process for me to reach the sobriety that I enjoy today. And New Year's Eve is special to me because on New Year's Eve, what is that, tomorrow? New Year's Eve tomorrow, I'm going to be celebrating my 4th year of full sobriety from drugs and alcohol. And it means a lot to me. So, ask me, does it mean any less? Are you any more used to it? Is it any more kind of a background thing to you today than it was a year ago? Honestly, no. My sobriety means more to me today than it did yesterday. And it means more to me in this moment than it did in the moment when I stood up here and talked to you guys about this last year. I have so much to be grateful for in my life. I've had an amazing year, and a lot of that is due to you guys. We've had so much fun growing together, learning together, talking about our passion and sharing our passion together. And I'm so grateful for you guys. I'm so grateful for so many aspects of my professional and my personal life. And all I can say is it becomes clearer and clearer to me with every passing year that these things wouldn't be here without my sobriety. The things I'm most proud of, the things that bring me the most joy, the most contentment, the most pleasure in my life, they would never have come into my life without my decision to get sober. Doesn't mean getting sober got me those things, but it was a price of admission for me to reach the clarity of thought, the self-love, the level of health, the level of personal alignment that sobriety personally gave to me. And without that, I would not be enjoying any of the things that I'm so grateful to be standing here and in possession of today. I'm a truly abundant man. The reason I want to bring this up to you guys today is New Year's Eve is, to me, like maybe the most dramatic example of a cultural event with a strong bias toward consumption of drugs and alcohol. And there's nothing wrong. I want to be clear. If you make a personal choice to responsibly consume drugs or alcohol, that's okay. I have no judgment for you. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's not what I'm here to stand here and say. But what I also want to tell you is okay is not doing those things. That's something I was really upside down about for like a lot of my adult life. I felt a lot of cultural and community pressure to indulge, to imbibe, especially on nights like New Year's Eve. And it took me a long time, a lot longer than it should have, to realize, hey, I actually don't have to do that. And it's going to feel a little bit awkward at first because I'm used to doing that. But I don't have to do that just because that's what my community or that's what my society sort of biases me towards. I can make my own choice regarding that. And when I do make my own choice, that's going to be a better choice, whether it's the more conscious choice to indulge, or whether it's the choice to abstain, as I have reached. It's going to be a better one if you make it with full cognizance and full recognition that, hey, this is my choice, and I don't need to be pushed around by or influenced by those around me in an area that is so personal and so important. So I just want you to think about that going into your New Year's Eve. I don't know what you guys have planned. I don't know what you're going to be doing, but if you want to go and enjoy your New Year's Eve and have a drink or do anything else recreational responsibly and keep yourself and those around you healthy and safe, that's okay, whatever choice you make. But I want you to feel equally empowered to make either choice. You want to indulge responsibly? Fine. You want to abstain? That's fine too. And all I can tell you is, as someone who has done both, for me personally, I don't know how it's going to go for anybody else, but for me personally, the choice to abstain has changed my life. It has truly changed my life in ways that I'm so grateful for. And I wouldn't be standing here talking to you guys, enjoying your company so much without that little tiny choice, that little curiosity to say, hey, what if I didn't? So give it a try if you're curious. Either way, stay healthy, stay safe, be responsible out there. I hope you enjoy the last 2 days of 2022. It's been an amazing year. I'm so grateful that I've gotten to spend it with you guys, and I cannot wait for everything that is coming in 2023. It's going to be an even better year. Thank you guys truly, deeply for being my community here on Friday mornings. I can't tell you how much it means to me to get to share this time with y'all. I hope you have a great rest of your day, great rest of your year, and we'll see you in the new year.